Believe it or not, I am the moderator. I'd like to start by just replying to some of the things Tucker said. And generally, our challenge here tonight is that Tucker and Jordan and I agree on almost everything. So we're trying to get a bit of controversy going. But I would say this, Tucker, as far as I can see, the governing party in your country now has as its sole claim to resumption of its mandate the equation Trump equals Hitler, which is, of course, so fatuous and outrageous that no person with an IQ in at least double figures could believe it. And it will get the reception it deserves on election day, I think, despite massive efforts at stuffing the ballot boxes and bringing non-existent people onto the voting list. But because of that, I think we should be doubly careful about suggesting that Chrystia Freeland, whom I also know, I've known her for some years, is worse than the Nazis. I mean, she isn't. She's actually quite a nice lady, but she's politically misguided, has always been misguided. The FT which you support, other than for hiring her, is itself not an acceptable publication anymore. It's a ludicrous, globalist, socialistic, interventionist, regimentationist paper, not really the paper it was under Nigel Lawson and others of a legitimate newspaper for commerce, free commerce everywhere in the world. And so what we have is bad enough without suggesting it's Nazism or worse. It isn't. It's not that bad, but it's bad.
If I could just, this is a problem that I have had my whole life. I don't fully explain what I think, and you raise a really good point. I made a serious charge against her, and let me just be a lot more precise about why I believe what I said. I saw the video the other day, and I've never taken her seriously, as I said, but I didn't think that she was as malicious and cold as I now believe she is until I saw the video of David Menzies from Rebel News being arrested after trying to ask her a question. And I thought to myself, as someone who is often approached by people as I walk into buildings with questions, how would I feel if someone approached me and asked a question, even a question I don't like, and my security team threw him against a wall and put him in handcuffs? I would say, you stop that immediately. I could not, as a matter of conscience, allow a man to be arrested in my presence for asking a question. And I think that anyone who thinks that's okay is a truly dangerous person who should not have power. That's how I feel.
I agree with you, except I don't think she ordered it. I think we
But she watched it.
No, let me say something. I think in a way what happened is even more worrisome than that. Some palooka from the RCMP took it upon himself as a demonstration of initiative, precisely the kind of initiative you attributed to the people in goose-stepping in tight uniforms. And I mean, many people, especially in the United States, still think of the RCMP as people in red tunics with a musical ride, and Rosemary with Nelson Eddy and so on, singing in the Rockies here. But we saw in the MacDonald Commission inquiry after the imposition of the War Measures Act by the elder Trudeau in 1970, what an absolutely incompetent bunch of palookas the RCMP are. So some of the blame belongs on them, their initiative. I
agree, but it's her security detail, and as someone, I know you spent a lot of your life with security around you, whatever, you just can't allow that. You just cannot allow people to behave that way, because it's such a violation of human rights, and that's happening in this country, and no one's saying anything about it.
I want to turn to Jordan. We've had discussions in Calgary earlier today and last night, and I emerged as the optimist. And I'm not an absolute optimist, but in fact, I think the public is turning in this country and in the United States. I'm afraid as a member of the British Parliament, I can't hold out any hope for England for the next 5 years, but it'll come to its senses eventually. But I think it's turning, and we see it tonight. We see it, believe it or not, it is even the case in Toronto, where you Albertans have more friends and admirers than you think, including Jordan and me. A city, I may say, that I understand Albertans don't like Toronto, and I don't blame them, but when Tucker compares Toronto to Gary, Indiana, which is a bombed-out rubble heap of abandoned steel factories and rioters and drug dealers, he stirs up something I was not aware that I possessed, and that was a bit of municipal chauvinism. I would like to ask Jordan, on this business of, I mean, we agree. I think everyone in this great stadium agrees with Tucker's denunciation of our health system. It's a shambles and a disgrace, and it is so bad that, as he said, the health system that's supposed to promote life is now selling the virtues of suicide, and not only to sick people, to poor people as well. As if you have no chance of recovering and becoming prosperous. But Jordan, where do you stand on this optimism, pessimism scale that Tucker and I have built up a little here?
Yeah! I think we have every reason to assume that, and I guess this is why I'm going around the world talking to people, I guess, is that I think that if we put our hearts and our souls into it, that we could make this world into a place that's so good we could hardly imagine it. And I think with the technology that's in front of us, which is transforming at a rate that's beyond comprehensible, literally, that we could do much better in the next 50 years than we did in the last 200, and that's really saying something. But I also think that if we let the worst parts of ourselves gain the upper hand, given our enhanced technological power, we could produce a hell that would make Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany look like practice. And so there's a great hope in that, but a great warning. And one of the things you all want to consider too is that because you're so much more powerful than people were in the past with the technology that you have at your disposal, with the influence that you can have in the world, that all your particular and individual moral flaws are going to find their amplification in the world in a way that wasn't really evidently true in the past. And so I think that if we got our act together, things could be unbelievably positive. But if we remain narcissistic, infantile, and foolish, like certain of our leaders, then things could go extraordinarily badly. And I think we'll see how that plays out in the course of the lifetimes of most of the people in this room.
I have the honor of sharing a podcast with the eminent historian Victor Hansen and the former U.S. drug czar and education secretary Bill Bennett. And Victor presents, I think very accurately, the correlation of forces in our English-speaking countries' societies that Tucker referred to. The enemy of practically all of us here, unless they're spies from the CBC or elsewhere, they possess the academy, they possess the media, they possess Wall Street and the equivalent to an extent in Canada. Silicon Valley, which I agree with you is an abominable place. You should direct your strictures against them instead of Toronto. And they have big entertainment and big sport. I mean, people are tremendously talented at entertaining and athletics, but are utter morons politically, malignant morons, many of them. They have all of that, but we have the people, and we are going to show that. And despite their attempt to steal elections in your country, we don't much stoop to that here, although we may learn. We imitate everything else you do. Despite that, we're going to win, and I feel I'm very confident about that. And on what Jordan said, even the period since World War II, when the great powers haven't been at war with each other, has shown an astounding increase in prosperity in the world. The total percentage in the whole world, huge populations it now has, that's in designated poverty, severe poverty, is down to under 10%. And we are making progress. It's just frustrating that these leading countries, such as ours, are at the moment so incompetently governed. And we are ultimately going to lose our position of moral and practical leadership if we underperform, as this country now is underperforming. So, but you know, I wish I could say I could suggest any better way of getting out of this and reversing the trend than the one I have. I think if we all keep our heads about us and go to the polls and change governments, I think we'll get what we want. The people do get the government we deserve, and if we deserve a good government, we'll get a good government. And you have one here in Alberta.
May I just clarify one thing? I'm sorry to beat up on Toronto, and I'm certainly sorry to compare it to Gary, Indiana. Toronto's not the worst place in the world, and I'll concede that Gary ended up maybe a little worse. My problem with Toronto is not with the city itself, which is, again, fine, as cities go. It's the metaphor of Toronto and the vision of the future that Toronto represents. And so the question that no one ever asks about most places is, what do they do here? Like, what's the point of the city? What's the business here? What do they add to the country? And Toronto represents a vision that I reject, which is an economy based on banking and real estate. I don't think it's a real economy. I think banking has its place, real estate has its place. I don't think you can build a country on that, and I don't think you should. This province represents the alternative vision, which I support, which is a place that actually adds to the sum total of good in a country, that produces energy and food. And energy and food are non-negotiables. You have to have them. You do not have to have banking, and you do not have to have commercial real estate. Okay, you just don't. There are places without them. In fact, most of history has been sort of fine without them. But no place can exist without energy or food. And so when I see the relative status allocated to Alberta versus Toronto, that part of Ontario, I'm like, this is out of whack. There is no sane world in which a city that produces nothing is more impressive than a province that produces everything that the country needs. So that's all I'm saying.
Jordan, you're a renowned psychologist, and your renown has been most recently emphasized by the attempt of your peers to discipline you and send you for lessons in public relations. The fact that they would do this, it does indicate how extraordinarily accomplished you are and how widely admired you are.
Yeah!
And notwithstanding my city of residence, I'm very proud that you replaced our former mayor, Rob Ford, as the world's most famous Canadian. I want to ask you, as a psychologist, do you think that the psychology of the United States and Canada right now, mass psychology, is such that we are in upward mode? We're going to cast off the incompetence that has ruled us and the perfidy and venality that has ruled us, and do a better job of self-government? I mean, is the psychology right for an upward movement, or do you feel we're sinking?
No, I think, again, I would say I'm optimistic on that front too, because I think the best thinkers that I've encountered, and I'm privileged because, well, apart from the fact that I'm male and white, obviously, but
Go, George!
Sorry about that. But I've been privileged to meet some of the world's brightest people and to talk to them in depth, you know, and I see a realization dawning, even in unlikely places, that the core values of our civilization, and those are really Judeo-Christian values, are valid, true, and irreplaceable. And let me explain what I've seen. So, in recent months, I've watched a number of surprising conversions or semi-conversions. And so, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, some of you may know of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and if you don't, you should, because she's one of the world's bravest people. And she was a real admirer of the new atheists for a long time. And she had her reasons, because she suffered greatly at the hand of psychopathic fundamentalists. And she's concluded that the Christianity that underlies her society is irreplaceable and has actually converted. That despite being an admirer for a very long time of the new atheists, Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, were very intelligent people, by the way, but wrong in a deeply interesting way. Her husband, Neil Ferguson, who was also an atheist, has also converted. My friend Douglas Murray, who was also a follower of the new atheists, now realizes and understands, and I would say intellectually, that a humanism unmoored from a deep metaphysical substrate will fall prey to the kind of ideological lunacy that now characterizes our times and that threatened the entire planet a number of times in the 20th century. I can see this happening all over, and there are deep reasons for that, and they're going to become more evident in very short order. And so I think we're on the verge of a conscious metaphysical revolution that will reveal to us once again the profundity, depth, necessity, and value of the core propositions that made the West free, prosperous, and great. And so...
May I just add one thing to that? I couldn't agree with that more. I can't express it as eloquently as you just did, and I want to try. But I'll say two things. One, I noticed that, and I've never been an atheist, but I've never been, that far from atheism. I always lived in sort of rich, well-educated world among people who mock the religious because they're primitive. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have heard more people talk about the possibility that all that we can experience with our senses is not all that there is. And of course that's true, it's obviously true, and there's no society in human history that's believed otherwise. Only the West, since we dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, only the West, since 1945, has proceeded as a society with the assumption that there's no God. That's never happened before. And of course it doesn't work at all. That's changing really fast, and I feel it. I also see, and it's very obvious if you just look for it, that the main thing that people who run this country and my country and a lot of Western countries hate is Christianity. They hate it more than anything. And you see it in their behavior. You see it in the arrests of Christian pastors. And if there's one group in the world, whether you're a Christian or not, you certainly don't need to be a Christian to acknowledge what's obviously true. These are the least threatening, least bad people in your society. These are the people who mean you the least harm. These are the people who commanded to pray for their enemies. These are people who commanded to give up their life for people they don't know and for others. And so again, you don't have to be an adherent of that religion to see those people as a group you might want more of. Because what's the downside to having people who love you despite the fact you hate them? Like, that seems like you'd want more of those. And yet those people are the first to get arrested. And their churches are burned, 90 in this country, with the full tacit support of your government. Like, what is that? Why are they going after them? Of all the problems your country has, my country has, why are the Christians being persecuted? And they are being persecuted.
because Christ is king.
Well, it tells you there's something else going on here. There may be their goals, maybe this is part of something bigger. I mean, just meditate on that for the weekend and see the conclusion you come to. That's all I would say.
On this, Tucker, I have to agree with you completely, and I'm afraid that Canada is in the forefront of advanced Western countries with a Judeo-Christian tradition and a tradition of tolerance also. At the forefront, the vanguard of effectively shedding our, even what is now a officious and paper-thin adherence to the idea of a divine intelligence existing. We're getting perilously close all the time, and you see it in judgments of the Supreme Court that are terribly poorly reasoned and agitate against any religious notions that should cause them to temper their idea of interpretation of the law. And I would just say that we, all of us, know enough that if you, I'm not talking about what people's religious practices or anything like that, that's none of my business. But if you banish absolutely the idea in a militant atheistic manner that it is impossible that there are any spiritual forces or anything whatsoever beyond what we absolutely know, you are creating a vacuum in the human mind and in society that ultimately will be filled by horrible pagan monsters like Hitler and Stalin.
Can I say one thing? This is, one of the saddest facts of our current civilization is that there's just no history. The iPhone makes history irrelevant. It's all about right now. But it's worth learning some things about history, and here's my recommendation. Spend, an afternoon reading about the French Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, the Spanish Civil War, and what do they all have in common? At their heart was a desire not to replace Christianity with reason, as the Jacobins claimed, but to crush and destroy and to humiliate Christians in a way that's very reminiscent of what the Romans did in the 1st and 2nd centuries. It's not just oh, that's silly and superstitious, we're going to move on to something better. It's no, we're going to crush you, and we're going to ritually humiliate you, and that is very much what the trans thing is about. No one is helped by transgenderism. You've never met anyone who is happier because he's self-castrated. I personally feel very sorry for trans people. I'm not angry at them at all. I think they are victims of bigger forces. But to officially promote that is a humiliation ritual designed to put Christians in an untenable position where they have to either swear allegiance to the new state religion, which is transgenderism, or to their ancestral religion, which is Christianity. It is a loyalty test, and it's meant to humiliate and destroy them. And let's just be honest about what we're seeing.
So, I've been thinking about this idea of what should be properly put in the highest place for a very long time. I became convinced 40 years ago, I suppose, of the existence of evil in some transcendent sense. I suppose when I tried to look for something that I had, what would you say, that I could claim with unshakable faith, what I discovered was that there were certain acts that occurred in the 20th century that were so brutal and so malevolent that they absolutely convinced me of the reality of evil. And there's a corollary to that that's necessary to understand, is that if evil, an absolute evil exists, first of all, if absolute evil doesn't exist, then what happened in Auschwitz was just a matter of opinion, right? The moral catastrophe of Auschwitz is just an opinion. And that in itself is a conclusion that has no small degree of malevolence. So we should be clear about that. If what happened in Auschwitz, if the fact that Auschwitz camp guards could conduct themselves in the utterly brutal manner that they did and enjoy it. If that was evil, and that's a fact, then, hey, pipe down. This isn't your conference. Then there's an opposite, right? If you identify something on one pole, you've implicitly identified something on the other pole. And so one of the things you might say is that whatever absolute good might be, and that would be something akin to God, would be that which is as far away from Auschwitz as you can possibly get. And to pursue that would be to pursue the direction that leads you as far away, let's say, from the horrors of Nazi Germany as you could get. And I believe that technically there is no difference between that and the pursuit of a religious path. And then I would say, if it's true that the core of malevolence is something like the sacrifice of others in a painful manner to your own idiot whims and desire for power, which isn't a bad encapsulation, then the opposite of that would be your voluntary self-sacrifice in the service of what's best and others. And that is the ideal that Christianity puts at the center of the moral universe. And so I don't see a way around that. And that's not a conclusion that I drew lightly, for what that's worth. I've spent 40 years thinking about very little else than that. And I think that we're going to come to understand that consciously, widely, far more rapidly than anyone suspects, for any number of reasons, and that will be, well, the consequences of that are very difficult to predict, but the fact that it's going to occur is definitely one of the things that makes me optimistic. We've all been faced in the 20th century, I would say, with the irrefutable evidence of transcendent evil, and that means we all now have the opportunity to discover the irrefutable existence of transcendent good, and to allow that to guide us. And if with our technological power we had the capacity to be guided by what is truly and transcendently good, then there's nothing we couldn't accomplish in the positive direction.
Tucker, whether everybody in this country is happy with it or not, the whole world is extremely heavily influenced by the United States. And whatever any of us think of any American regime, none of us in the West should ever fail to remember and be grateful for the fact that we owe chiefly to the United States the greatest strategic, bloodless victory in the history of the world, our victory of Western civilization in the Cold War and the tremendous spread of democracy and the free market in the world. We owe it chiefly to your country, and we must never forget that. So with that in mind, I'd like you to be as daring as you can and as perceptive as only you can be, as someone who knows the United States, all of the United States very well. What do you predict is going to happen in this political year in that country?
Thank you. I couldn't be more grateful to be an American. I've always felt that way. As I said, my dad's family was from Nova Scotia. They left at the time of the American Revolution because they didn't want to be free, so they fled to the Maritimes. And just kidding. But anyway, then they came back, ultimately. Many are still there. Their name is Rayfuse. I think they're liberal. But I have always been grateful for my birthright as an American and for the God-given rights that are protected by my government officially in the Bill of Rights, which is a beautiful document, the greatest document we've ever produced, and that no other country has. So, and I will feel that way till I die. And unlike a lot of people in our leadership class, I have no plans to go anywhere else. I've got too many children and too many dogs, and I'm dying there. But I'm definitely very concerned, and I can't see the outcome of this year clearly at all. I was thinking yesterday, it really is like looking through a shower curtain. You see these opaque shapes lurking, but you can't tell if they're, friend or foe, nude or clothed. You don't really know what you're looking at. But you know that there is a collision coming between titanic forces, the population of America versus its leaders. And it's coming to a head because of the structure of this election. And so you have the Republican candidate, he is going to be the candidate, whose election is the one thing. But I think it's kind of determined. And of course it's politics, so it's filled with all sorts of, the amount of ugliness display beneath the surface in all politics everywhere is really awe-inspiring. These people are really dirty everywhere, not just my country. You may know about that. But the one thing that the people in power, and I don't just mean in Washington in our government, I mean in our financial centers and our entertainment centers, our country's kind of cool because they're identified by cities. So Los Angeles, New York, Washington make all the decisions, of course. And the one thing they won't tolerate is the orange man in power. And you you wonder, well, why? Because Trump is not a radical at all. And Trump's vision for America, this is an informed assessment of Trump, Trump's vision for America is like Studio 54 in 1978. I'm serious. Trump really loved the country he grew up in, he really loved it, and he means it. He loved the people who live there, he loved its traditions, its weird little customs, its idiosyncrasies, and that's kind of what he wants. He doesn't want a brave new future of new things. He wants to return not to antebellum America, but to 1980 America. And it's kind of hard to argue why that's bad, actually. And so that's not a revolutionary agenda, nor is it a counter-revolutionary agenda. It's a return to normalcy. And the phrase, "Make America Great Again," means return it to a period not so long ago, when everyone was enfranchised and everyone had rights, but everyone was roughly, not everyone, but most people were sort of united in a sense of common purpose and culture. They were Americans, and they knew what that meant. We don't have that anymore, and that's Trump's vision. So you may not think that's possible. You may not think maybe that's even virtuous to want that. But if you think that's a grotesque hellscape that he's describing, you're the freak, not him. And yet they all feel that way. They mean it too, they really feel that way, it's not a joke. And so what's gonna happen? And I guess I dissent a little bit from the much more optimistic view that you have, both of you, which I really appreciate hearing and I want to believe it, but that in the end, the will of the people matters. The conclusion that I've come to is that it matters less than it should. And that the people in power really do make the bulk of the decisions. And I say that after spending 35 years in Washington and watching the agenda of both parties and comparing that agenda to the public opinion polling of what people actually want and finding no union set. No union set. There's not the same agendas. And we have a democratic system where these people are elected every 2 years in the Congress, every 6 years in the Senate, every 4 years in the White House. And their agenda never changes, and the desires of the American public by and large are never met or even addressed. And you sort of, after a while, conclude, maybe it doesn't matter what people want, it only matters what the people in power want. I don't want to think that, but I don't know what other conclusion to reach. So what you have now is a legit mass movement on behalf of Donald Trump that's 100% real, and you have absolute, ironclad resistance to the democratic process working its way to a legitimate conclusion by the people who have all the power. What happens next? I don't even know. And I'll sum it up this way. Today, it is a race in the foreseeable future between Donald Trump, the former president, now effectively the Republican nominee, and the incumbent president. They got more votes than Barack Obama somehow, because he's just so popular. It's just the magnetism. He spent the entire 2020 campaign moldering and deteriorating in his basement, and somehow he was more popular than Barack Obama. Right, okay. Anyway, so it's the race between Biden and Obama. I just don't see that happening. I just don't. And I hope to be wrong. I want to return to normalcy too. I'm the opposite of a revolutionary too. That's what I love about Trump. He doesn't want radical change. We're not actually made for radical change. We can't digest it. People hate radical change. They want kind of continuity, and I do too. But I just don't see this playing out the way it's currently formulated. Sorry.
See, so I